Today we are looking at a case from the late 19th century, so sit back as we go to Australia. Emma Courtney was born on the 24th of November 1864 in the small town of Evandale in the northern part of Tasmania. Her father, named Henry, worked as a labourer, and her mother, named Joanna, worked in domestic service. Although not very well off, Emma's parents always tried to bring up their children to be respectable and well-mannered. Emma's early life is somewhat unknown, but she did receive some education. In the 1860s, schools in Tasmania faced issues due to the rural population and the reluctance of some parents to allow their children to attend, as many considered it more important that a child work and contribute to the house. But in 1868, education was made compulsory for all children between the ages of 7 and 12 who lived within a mile of the school, and in 1869 the age increased to 14 years old and the distance to within 2 miles. This, however, was often not enforced, and as children reached 10 and 11, the level of attendance reduced. In 1882, when Emma was 17 years old, she discovered that she was with child. She was unmarried, and like other young ladies in the same situation in the early 1880s, was judged to be someone who lacked moral character and became the subject of local gossip. She gave birth to a baby boy, but tragically, only 10 days later her baby died. By August of the same year, Emma married. Her husband was a 28-year-old gentleman named Henry Williams, who worked as a labourer. He was not, however, the father of her deceased baby. Over the next 4 years, Emma gave birth to 3 more children, 2 daughters and a son, all of whom died in infancy. At the time, the infant mortality rate was around 140 infants in every 1,000, and this increased in the more rural and less populated areas. On the 14th of July 1887, Emma again gave birth, this time to a baby girl, who the couple named Ella. Drawn to better opportunities on the Australian mainland, Emma and her husband, accompanied by their daughter, moved to Melbourne. At first, things seemed to be better for the couple, but in the early 1890s, the Australian economy fell into a severe depression. Overseas investment significantly reduced, banks failed, and unemployment increased. The situation was so bad that relief societies were formed to distribute food to the poorest families. Finding work became difficult, and to try and make things a little easier, Emma's mother agreed that she would care for Ella back in Tasmania. By this time, many farm workers had been laid off, as there was a fall in the price of wool, which in the late 19th century counted for about half of Australia's exports. Some of the farm workers would then migrate to the cities to look for work. Although there were more opportunities in the larger urban areas, GDP had fallen by 17%. Melbourne was the second largest city in the British Empire and had been considered to be one of the richest in the world. It had fine sandstone buildings, tree-lined boulevards, parks and gardens. But for the poor, life was a challenge. Emma and Henry lived in terrible conditions, occupying one room in an overcrowded house. The city still had open and unvented sewers. Cesspits were known to contaminate drinking water in badly drained areas, and it was not until 1897 that the city constructed a sewage system. With the poor hygiene, people were often sick, and in 1893, when Emma was expecting her 6th child, her husband Henry contracted typhoid and died. She was now a widow, pregnant and alone. She had to accept charity and gave birth to a baby boy, who she named John. She found a place to live in the Port Melbourne area of the city, and in order to try and support her baby, she started to work as a prostitute. Emma seemed to take good care of her child. She would make sure that he was fed and clothed, even if it meant that on occasions she would not be able to feed herself. The more attention the baby needed meant the less time that Emma could work. Eventually she found a lady named Mrs. Wilson, who lived in English Street, who looked after young children in return for a small payment. Emma, however, would pay Mrs. Wilson to look after her baby for a week, and then not come back for weeks at a time, which meant that Mrs. Wilson had to find out her whereabouts and return her young son to her. It was becoming increasingly more difficult for Emma. She moved from one impoverished lodging house to another, and each time Other residents would complain when her baby cried. She asked the Catholic Church for assistance, but they would not help, as her baby had not been baptised into the Catholic faith. She also approached a lady named Miss Sutherland, but with so many mothers in a similar position, Miss Sutherland did not have room for another baby in her house. Emma's mother, who still lived in Tasmania, told her daughter that she was unable to help. Emma's father had died in 1883, and her mother had remarried. Emma had started a relationship with a gentleman named William May. He was not an upstanding member of the community. In fact, he had been in prison on more than one occasion, and like Emma, moved from lodging house to lodging house. By 1895, the economy had slightly improved. Unemployment had fallen, but things were still difficult. Emma was struggling to look after her child. She even asked a lady in the street to look after John for a few moments while she entered a shop. She then disappeared. The lady went to the police station, and the officer on duty returned the child to his mother. It was apparent that Emma was struggling. She told William May that she was going to take John to the Salvation Army, as they offered great support for unmarried mothers and their young children. On Sunday, the 11th of August 1895, Emma went out to take her 2-year-old child to the Salvation Army. A few hours later, she returned alone. She told William that she had not wanted to give him up, but she knew it was the best thing to do. The following day, Monday the 12th of August, a labourer named Neil Oberg, who worked on a steam dredger near the sugar works at Port Melbourne, saw something in the water at the Sandridge Lagoon. At first, he was not sure what it was, but with the aid of a boat hook, he managed to retrieve it. To his horror, he found that he had pulled a small child's body from the water. He carefully placed the deceased child on the ground while he went and informed the police. The police soon arrived, and after a brief look around the area, they transported the body to the mortuary. They then went about trying to find out the identity of the poor deceased little boy. They noted that the body had been tied down with a piece of braid that had been attached to a stone. Detective Sergeant Sainsbury took charge of the case. News of the little boy found drowned in the lagoon soon spread, and a gentleman named Frederick Chamberlain Foster identified the body to be that of a child named John Williams, the son of Emma Williams, although due to her profession, she often went by many aliases. The papers soon learnt of the discovery and made it their headline story. It did not take long before the whole of Melbourne knew of the crime, and that the police were searching for the deceased child's mother. Emma Williams was found and arrested. She was taken into the police station to be interviewed, but she did not confess to the crime. Nevertheless, on Wednesday the 14th of August 1895, she was taken to the police court and charged with murder. There was much public anger towards her. This had been made worse by the reporting of the crime in the newspapers. She was described as heartless, cruel and callous, and when news spread that she had been taken to the courts, large crowds gathered outside, shouting and jeering. Emma, however, appeared to be calm throughout the ordeal. An inquest was arranged for Friday the 16th of August. While the police were convinced that they had the person responsible for this most terrible act, they were still anxious to obtain more evidence, especially as Emma had denied responsibility. A witness came forward from an unlikely source. The gentleman who Emma had been living with, named William May, someone who had frequently found himself on the wrong side of the law. He arrived at the police station and informed the officers that Emma had undoubtedly committed the crime. He said she was still wearing the same dress that she had worn on the day she had allegedly gone to the Salvation Army office, so the dress should contain the remains of the braid. Emma, however, had placed the remaining braid from her dress in the chimney of the watchroom. The police searched the room and soon retrieved it. With this new evidence, Detective Sergeant Sainsbury again spoke to Emma. Realising that she was in a hopeless situation, she confessed to the crime. She said that in the evening of the 11th of August, she left her lodgings at about 8:15. She took with her 2-year-old son, John. She walked to the Sandridge Lagoon. There was no one around. She then found a stone and tore a piece of braid from her dress. She tied her son to the stone and threw him into the lagoon. She then waited for a while before walking back to her lodgings. Sergeant Sainsbury and his officers was somewhat surprised as to the calmness in her voice as she told this macabre tale. She then went on to try and explain why she committed this most terrible crime. She said that she had tried to find suitable care for her son, but wherever she went she was always turned away. The church would not take him in. Miss Sutherland had no space. Even her mother had told her that she was unable to help. She said that she had tried to pay for someone to look after him, but her extremely difficult financial position meant she was unable to. She told the officers that she'd always tried her best to look after the little boy, and whenever he cried, the other residents in the lodging house would complain. Unsure just how well Emma Williams was able to read, Sergeant Sainsbury read her statement back to her. Emma then signed it. The next day her confession was published in 2 daily newspapers. The story had gained an immense amount of public interest. It was reported that Emma's partner, William May, had said that she was not a good mother and had shown no remorse for what she had done. Another lady, who lived in the same lodging house, described how Emma had always ill-treated the child. At the inquest, it was confirmed that the child, John Williams, had died due to drowning. A verdict of willful murder was returned, and a trial was set for the 3rd week of September. The trial of Emma Williams began at the Melbourne Supreme Court on the 24th of September 1895. Despite the fact that she had previously confessed to the crime, she pleaded not guilty. The jury were presented with the evidence of the braid tied to the stone that was used to drown the poor little boy, and they were told that it matched that found at the watch house where Emma had been placed. The gentleman that she had been living with at the time, William May, told the court that when he learned that a small child had been found, he asked if it was John, but she told him that she had taken John to the Salvation Army to be cared for. When it was discovered that the child was in fact Emma's son, William said that she asked him to take her to Sydney, as everyone would think that she had drowned her child, but she insisted that she had not. Other witnesses, including other residents of her lodging house, told the court that she was an uncaring mother, and ladies who looked after the little boy at various times, including Miss Sutherland, spoke about how the defendant failed to pay the agreed fee, so the child was always taken back to her. 2 of the ladies had reported the situation to the authorities and asked that the child be taken into care, but the magistrates would not consider it, and he was always returned to his mother. People described how the child, who was only 2 years old, would walk around, and when they saw him, they would sit him down and search for Mrs. Williams. As the witnesses gave their testimony, a picture started to emerge of a bad and neglectful mother who earned what little money she had by immoral means. The trial only lasted a day, and following the summing up from the judge, the jury were sent out to deliberate. They returned 20 minutes later to find the defendant, Mrs. Emma Williams, guilty, and the judge sentenced her to death. He said, "Society has not the means to support and maintain the children of all the immoral women that exist in the community." The story of Emma Williams had fascinated the Melbourne public, and following the sentence, there were attempts to get it commuted. Petitions were raised, which gained many signatures. Emma herself tried to obtain a stay of execution by claiming that she was pregnant. This was later confirmed by doctors not to be the case. However, as stories emerged of her life, she gained even more public sympathy. It was reported how she had an illegitimate child in Tasmania who had died. She then married and lost all but 2 of her children, and now, following the death of John, only 1 survived. Her life became even more difficult when her husband died, leaving her pregnant and destitute, and despite her best efforts, she was unable to care for her child, as her cries for help were not answered. Despite some people believing that Emma was a victim of extreme circumstance, no reprieve was granted, and at 10 a.m. on Monday the 4th of November 1895, Emma Williams was hanged. What became of her daughter is unknown. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any feedback or comments you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case